children's church. And if you feel like a kid and you want to go back there, you can do that. Yeah. Riley's going to go. Well, any great blessing, any way that you've seen God move, especially during the last couple of weeks that we've been in all kinds of disarray. So, any way that you be able to share that you've seen God move and do things in you or through you, either way. Yes, in fact, I asked them to share about their time in Australia. So stand up and talk real loud.
Oh, Australia.
This is the time.
Okay. Dependency. God taught me so many things. He said I could only share one thing that God taught me. So I'm like, but dependency. Just like in every moment, every day, God was doing something new. He brought people moment by moment to say things when I was struggling or meeting me right where I was. I struggle with weakness a lot. Like I often don't feel like I can do anything or I have breath pain, and God just kept giving me strength. So meeting me physically, emotionally, spiritually, like I was so dependent on Him. He increased it so much during my time.
Awesome. Good, good. Jelly, how about you?
So in like Australia, I feel like I heard God saying like abide in me, like because we had this song called Abide, and they would sing it a lot, and so it was like abide in Him, even though you're going through things. And I also loved how I got to see the team members in Australia grow in God, and just like to see that point of view, because I have the point of view of being that team member, but it was really neat to see the other point of view of like being like seeing that team member grow. So I don't know.
Yeah, cool, cool. So if you didn't know that they were in Australia to help, what teen mission. If you're familiar with teen missions or not, here, mission trips for young people. Our young people have gone on mission trips with teen missions. Uh, so they have that in Australia as well as 17 or 20 other countries. And so the students got to go and help run their training camp in Australia to be there with them to do that. So how exciting! How fun is that you didn't have to go on I don't mean like you didn't have to go on a team, but going on a team is a long and tedious thing as well as a really impacting and great thing. However, you got to go for the short time and do that too. Good, good. Well, God, thanks for sharing that. Anyone else? Yes.
We had right on January 1st, we found out that my niece's son was strapped into a car seat and then not. And mom turned around after having set him up on a counter, 3 months old, and okay, 9 months old. I've been corrected. And she unbuttoned him for something and turned around and he flopped himself out. And like 4 or 5 foot fall, he hit the ceramic tile and he started seizing. He had blood coming out of his ear, and the whole world loses its mind because we're like 9 hours from her. None of the family can get there to be with her as she's calling an ambulance. So we all gathered up and we prayed. And we prayed over the little boy and over his mom in the situation. And he stopped seizing, like timeline wise, I think it was as we were praying for him after my sister hung up the phone. And the emergency services show up and they test him, and they checked him out. Their first concern was what everybody's concern is a brain issue. So they test him and they're like, all right, that's not it. It seems like it was a jarring incident. So he goes off to the hospital and he's gone through these batteries of tests, and it sounds like everything is going to be perfectly fine. I am blown away at all of it, and it was a moment to where, obviously for Bennett, my great nephew, but also for the family. We've got extended family who didn't know what else to do but to join in on the prayer. So seeing God move in their midst, I think, That's my thought.
Good. Good. Great. Anyone else? Yes. And for James? I'll bet. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Anyone else? All right. New year. Here we are. 40-day challenge. Here we are. Coming into that. This is the serving challenge, which may not be a huge challenge to us, although I think we can, in every topic, we can always go deeper in things, right? I mean, we started as a church of serving. We did a ton of it, especially the first couple of years, and it's still on our minds to do that. But this is one of those interesting ironies of the Christian faith. Jesus told his disciples, if you want to be the greatest, you have to serve. That's how this works. And Jesus, being the greatest, came to serve. He said that himself, and he did that himself. So we use the term greatest, and I don't know when it started. I'm usually kind of behind the eight ball about stuff like social trends, typically. I might have been better when I was younger. I don't know. But it seems like the older I get, the farther behind I get. You know, my kids start using words I have no idea what they mean. Like, what does that mean? Why are we using words we don't know what they mean? Exactly. So this whole term, I think the first time I started hearing this is about Tom Brady, that he was the GOAT. I'm not sure I want to be a GOAT. I'm not sure that's the best thing. I mean, an eagle maybe, lion, yeah, a goat. Of course, then I understood what it meant. Greatest of all time, GOAT, right? So it'd be fun to kind of ask the questions, like, because it's really subjective. It is. Statistically, I went and looked it up just to make sure. Tom Brady is the greatest of all time so far in football as a quarterback. There are some coming behind him. There are some on the top 10 list from years ago. So we might feel older and left behind, but just know it. Even though we're older, we still can hold records. Okay, that's still happening. So let's this fun little quiz, just real quick. I don't know how many of you know basketball. You guys know basketball at all? If I said LeBron James, what if I said Michael? Now you're getting our generation. Yeah, we know Michael Jordan. So if you think LeBron James is the best, then raise your hand here. No, nobody thinks LeBron James is good. You know, he came right out of high school and played in the NBA. You know that he led his team, I forget how many years he played, but he led his team into consecutive championships. And all the team stats went up when he played. When he quit, all the team stats went up. Okay, how about Michael Jordan? Was he better?
Yes.
Oh, look at that. We have that. When I was in Canada, I mentioned Michael Jordan one time, and this guy asked me after, he's like, that guy you mentioned. And I said, Michael. He said, who? I said, Michael. He said, if you would have talked about a hockey player, we would have had you. Learning culture. Yeah, I needed to learn culture. So let's get off of that. And so let's go to some superheroes like Superman or Wonder Woman. So Superman, better? Even some of you ladies are saying that's impressive. How about Wonder Woman? Now, a bunch of you are not voting. Do you just not know who they are, or are you just afraid? You're smiling and snickering, so I know you hear me. Okay, let's jump off of that part. Let's go to something that maybe is more in everybody's realm. Coke or Pepsi? Coca-Cola? Pepsi. Mountain Dew. Oh, RC Cola. Yeah, wow. Okay, so there's some of those differences. Now let's go right home on this one about cooking, right? So Betty Crocker. Now you might need to know both before you say yes. Betty Crocker or Gordon Ramsay. Okay, so Betty Crocker. Oh, even some younger people. Nice. How about Gordon Ramsay? How many of you do not know who Gordon Ramsay is? He's like Betty Crocker with a big mouth. Like he's a really good cook, so I assume. But he's like, I would not want to be working with him in the kitchen. I'd want to be served by him, but not with him. That's rough. So none of those things are going to be settled in our lifetime, right? Because there's always, I guess what the one I didn't mention, and probably I just didn't in my brain because I knew what it would stir. And that's probably like the difference between Chevrolet, Ford, and Dodge. So everyone who thinks Dodge is the best, we're right here. Thank you. Dakota guys right there. We're it. And yeah, we're Dodge people. I'm not going to ask the rest of them because it doesn't matter. So we're only talking about the greatest things like that. We all have this desire to be great. Like it's in us. And it might be squashed for some of us over time. And it might be just less of a need for some of us over time. But we all have this need. It's a human need, and it's not wrong. And we're going to talk about that to be great. It just depends on the motivation behind it and how it gets used. And it's a huge dichotomy in our culture between what is great and why it's great, right? And so we're gonna try to work through that. So listen, it has to do with serving. You probably got that by now. We found in these 40-day challenges, as you would find in most any kind of challenges you're in, that are like for growth of some sort, not just like your car broke down, you have to fix it. That's a challenge, but these kinds of that are disciplined, that are like I want to grow, I want to move forward. That there's multiple ways to participate. One of the ways to participate is to just watch and see what everybody else says and does and say, wow, that was interesting. I wish I would have. The other way is to do some of it, but stop on the uncomfortable parts. It's not going to be terribly uncomfortable, but serving has to do with other people. So there's going to be a measure of, for some of us, overcoming some of those barriers. Or it could be like, I'm doing this, I don't care what it costs, I'm in. And I want to see God do something in my life and through my life. And so there's multiple ways to look at it and do that. And I want to challenge all of us to be as close to, if not all the way in, to on it, right? That means about being in a group that discusses it. And we have 3 groups that meet regularly. And if you want to know who they are, there's one at my house, there's one at Aaron Teresa's house, and there's one is your house, right? Yeah, it's Cecilia's house and or Kim's house. Yeah, so those North Cocoa, and I live in Cocoa too. So if you want to do one somewhere else, we can do that. If you want to do one online, and that just could be total convenience because it means I would have to do another one too. Or somebody else could do that, whatever. At the end, you'd be able to write that on those cards that you have. Like, I'd be in a group, maybe one that's already meeting, or I could use it this time or day or whatever. Just because there's a difference between hearing, this is one of the least effective ways to learn, if you knew that. Just to be talked to is kind of one of the least effective ways to learn. To hear something and to be able to digest it by conversing about it is the second best way. It moves up the ladder, I should say. To hear it, converse about it, and then do something with it becomes one of the best ways. Really, the best way is to teach it, because now you are fully engaged, right? Now you have to think it through, you have to articulate and participate and do all that stuff and figure out conversation. Now that's the best way to do that, which kind of lends itself to why am I a preacher? Because God knew I need a lot of help in learning. So he's like, you do this part, and we'll make that go that way. So that's where we're at. And participation is really a big deal. And so it's 6 weeks. And so being on it and making sure, and if you miss a day, you don't give up the whole thing, jump back on it, right? Be in a group, talk about it. We're going to talk about it here. We're going to talk about it in our groups during the week. And in your prayer time, you have a chance to do that as well. So that's what we're going to do. This thing about greatness, remember, it is part of who we are. It's part of what we desire, and it's not wrong. It's God made us in his image, right? God made us in his image. Doesn't mean we're God, but it means a lot of his characteristics we have, his persona per se. So that to be creative, think of how creative humans are. We want to build, we want to make things, right? To be relational, we need that. Even if it's only a measure, we still need that. And we desire to do that. To connect and to move about and do things and create things. And all those things are really God's character within us. And to connect with him is the prime part of all of that. And in doing so, we become whole in the whole process of being human. And so we tend to think that wanting to be great, and it is, if it's a selfish thing, like I want to be great so that I'm better than everyone else, that's probably not the best idea, because when you're dead, that's over, right? But if I want to be the best that I could be right now so God can use me, that's the right thing. Like that's what I want. And so he gives a prescription for what is great. And we're gonna talk about that, and we're gonna change the goat word a little bit, because I'm not sure how good I feel about calling Jesus a goat. We're going to call him the GSOAT, the greatest servant of all time, right? Because this really is about serving. And that's his prescription for becoming great, which sounds odd. The worldly description and prescription is about like taking charge of making your plan. Don't let anybody stop you and move on ahead. And sometimes it means stepping on other people, right? Beating them out, whether highly competitive or not. And Jesus' way of servanthood is more about coming up alongside and helping others. Years ago, when we first started talking about when we started really putting some action to church planting and this church, we went to this conference, and the theme that year was hero makers. And it was really about finding someone else that has a desire to start a church and help them do that. And that was really one of the first years we were there, and I was there with Pastor Brad from Rockledge Church. I said, I never would have really articulated this. I never thought about it this way. But as they're talking about this, thank you for being our hero maker. Thank you, and thank Rockledge Church for being the hero makers that are helping us become what we want to become. And that's the same thing Jesus is doing, is creating greatness in everyone else, right? He's creating his greatness in everyone else to be everything that he would want us to be. And so in this encounter that he had with them in Matthew chapter 20, verses 25 to 28 in there, it's an interesting moment in which the two brothers, disciples, come up, and their mom happens to be there as well. And there must have been some conversation going on. And so the mom comes up to Jesus and says, would you allow my two sons to basically rule with you in eternity? When you come into your kingdom, will you let them rule with you and sit with you? And he doesn't even really talk to her about that. He just looks at them. And you might think he should just say, you guys are so selfish and terrible. I don't even want to be my disciples anymore. But he doesn't. He looks at them and he said, are you sure you know what you're asking for? Like, that's a big deal. And there's a huge cost. Why is there a cost to that? They're thinking, I want to be up here. And he's saying, yeah, but to be up here, you have to start way down here. And there's a huge cost to get there. So let's read a little bit. This is just the beginning still about what he's talking about. In verse 25, Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over their people, lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. There's something about having authority over people that is also an innate human characteristic for some reason. And we want to lord over people, meaning the world's way is about flaunting authority and power and wealth and status over other people so that I am better, right? So that I feel better about myself or whatever. And true greatness comes through a different kind of path, though. This is what Jesus said in verse 26. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus is telling them, no, it's not about getting up here so you can rule over everybody. He said, even the Son of Man, talking about himself, even I, the Son of God, came to this earth not so that everyone could bow down to me, but really he's going to go and die on the cross for everyone else. He's going to pay the ultimate price so that everyone else can become great, right? Total service, total servant all the way in all of that. There's a pastor of, I think, one of the largest churches in America, and he said this is Pastor Craig Groeschel. He said, in the kingdom of God, greatness is service, not status. Greatness is service, not status. We see that all through Christ's life in all this. And so Jesus becoming the greatest servant of all time. Some people would say it's not right for us to talk about being great. Christian people would say that. Why? Because it sounds so selfish, right? It sounds so self-serving. People of faith get nervous when we talk about focusing on the greatness of people. It should be the greatness of God that we're talking about. And there's some truth if that was the way we were talking, that would be bad. If it was just about us, right? But our measure of greatness here and now isn't even good enough for heaven. If we were truly great in everybody's eyes in the world, it would not be good enough for heaven. It's never good enough for God because he doesn't He doesn't measure our acceptability based upon some kind of achievements that we've made. He's not going to look down and say, or as we're standing before him at the end of time and say, oh, wow, you know what? You created so many jobs, you're going to heaven. That's not the criteria. He's not going to look at him and say, man, you built the tallest tower in the Middle East or the world. You're coming in. I can't believe that achievement. He's going to say, I see Jesus all over you. That's what he's going to say. You followed Christ. And we're going to say probably something like, yeah, but I didn't do very good. I know. He's going to say, I know. But you made him your Lord, and you did your best at doing that. And it's not about it's not even about how good I achieved being a Christian. Now, this is challenging. I'm going through this process right now with a ministry coach guy. I wasn't going to say this. I was going to say it earlier, but just briefly, because it's probably going to show up again later sometime this year. Because of what Jesus did on the cross, we are perfectly acceptable to God. Now, I look in the mirror and I say, probably not. Probably not, God. You're probably not like happy with all this. Not just what I see physically, but inside. Like, you're not good with all this. He wants us to grow and change and grow into greatness. But the truth is, because of what Jesus did on the cross, his death and resurrection, and giving us his life, when we receive that, we are perfectly acceptable to God. That's a weird truth to get a hold of it. As when we first started talking about that, I said, I know that and I believe that, but something inside me is resisting. Like, what about how I lack at serving him? What about this? He's like, but that has nothing to do with your position with Christ. It has nothing to do with it. He looks at us, if we have said, I will follow you, Jesus, and we're doing our best to follow him. I mean, if we say we're going to follow him and then just like ignore everything about him, there's going to be a different problem. But the truth is, because of the redemption of Jesus, we're perfectly acceptable to God. And that's a rough thing to separate from performance, isn't it? I've had the hardest time separating that. And we've talked about it 2 times already. Like, how do we separate that? Where's that? And we just have to. The problem is our entire world of people operates on the performance side, right? We all operate on the performance side. We're paid based on our performance. We have friends based on our performance, right? We have relationships based on performance. If I don't like the way you're performing and it doesn't do me any good anymore, I don't want anything to do with you. So that is always in front of us. It's always challenging us. So this idea of a relationship with God being based on what Jesus did on the cross and I am perfectly acceptable is a challenge on the good side. Like and so over the last month of talking that through and listening and praying and saying, God, what? How does this all play out? I'm finding a totally new kind of, what do I want to say? Freedom as a person. You say that. Because I may not, in fact, I know I don't measure up to everybody else's expectation. Not everybody. Like, it's impossible to do that. Like I told somebody the other day, I would never be a politician. Well, yeah, you got to be corrupt. No, because I couldn't please everybody. And to know every day that there's a poll published on how acceptable I am would just drive me nuts. I got to give up in the first week. What do you mean? People are going to tell me they don't like me? Forget it. I'm not doing this. Keep the $200,000. Like, I don't need that. Or 400, whatever it is now. I don't want that. I'll just be happy and work in my garden. Leave the rest of that alone. But to really get a hold of, I'm perfectly acceptable by God. It's one of the beginnings of this greatness in us. The rest of it is this working out of our practicalities, like how we live and what we do. Like, that stuff does matter. I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all, but it has nothing to do with my acceptability to God. Because the death of Christ and his resurrection makes that what it is. So we could take a deep breath and say, oh, you do love me, God, no matter what. And then we say, but what about the rest of this? Well, let's work on that. Let's work on that. So we go to work on that. And that's what this is. So these guys, they're believing that Jesus is the Son of God. They're coming with just a little perspective problem. It's like, no, it has nothing to do with you lording it over everyone else. It has everything to do with me helping you become everything it means to be great in the kingdom of God. And in doing so, you will impact the world. And look at that. We're reading from Bibles of history 2,000 years ago of these 12 guys who were not acceptable in everybody else's eyes. I mean, sometimes we don't see it as remarks, but there's remarks in the scriptures in the narrative. Like, aren't these guys from Galilee? Which is a way of saying, these guys aren't very smart. What are they doing here? How are they speaking and making all this work? Right? These are fishermen. I know some of you guys are fishermen, but these guys were career fishermen, which was really low on the totem pole of things to be. Shepherds, oh my goodness, we talked about it at Christmas, that the shepherds got called in to be the first ones to tell the story is ridiculous. They're not great. Why not King Herod? Why not the Magi? Why not all these other people? No, use these stinky shepherds to do that? Yeah, because in God's economy, that has nothing to do with it, right? Has nothing to do with it. We're going to be okay. All right, so that's the premise of this stuff is that to be a servant is what brings us to greatness. To be a servant is, and again, we probably have to redefine greatness in this process because it's not the kind of greatness that we get to lord over everybody because it has nothing to do with it. It has to be being everything God designed us to be and being able to be used by God in his kingdom in this world to touch the lives of other people. That's where that comes in. That's the greatness. Remember, Jesus, when he came down to the earth, he walked the same dirty roads, got his feet dirty. Not everybody liked him. None of the Pharisees did. Right? They had problems. He went in the church and turned over all the tables and messed them all up because they were doing things they shouldn't be doing in there. They didn't like him. What are we doing? They were jealous because he was getting all this attention from the regular people. And they wanted all the attention. They thought their greatness was being challenged. And here he is, the Son of God. And they're jealous because he's getting more attention. Instead of being like John the Baptist, right? Who said, he must increase and I must decrease. In that, look, we're still talking about John the Baptist too. He had the same mindset of serving God and serving others. That's all we got to do. Not that we're never going to be recognized for anything. It has anything to do with that. It has to do with true greatness in God's kingdom and how that works out. All right, this other verse here to look at from James. These are a couple verses that are going to kind of push into what we're really talking about in the rest of it. In James, he said, in talking about faith and deeds, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I'll show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there is one God? Good. Even demons believe, and they shudder. There's a difference between believing and following. There's a progression between believing and following. In fact, there's even some action to believing, if you know that. In the verse most everybody in the world would know, John 3:16, he says believe at least twice. And that word believe in there at its very root means to put yourself in God's hands. It's not just agreeing, although agreeing has to happen. It means to put your life in his hands. If you would believe, if you would put your life in his hands, eternal life is yours, right? Not just agreeing that, oh, God exists and he's good and there's heaven and hell. It's about the whole thing, about putting our life in his hands. So there's action, there's all those things. There's a difference between believing and following. And through this very series we're going to be talking about, that's what we need to catch on to. That this belief inside of us that is internal, faith is internal, actually comes out and becomes external in the ways that we talk, act, react, help others, all those kind of things. It happens all that way. So this is invitation to believe and to follow. Serving is one of the things Jesus said to do. To serve, to be a servant around everyone. And he gave us the truth about that, and we want to do that too. Our own mission for our church. Some of you might remember. Sometimes I have to look, I can stumble over the words a little bit. Shouldn't be stumbling. But no, the mission of the church is to help people realize, and that doesn't mean up here, it means make real. To help people realize the power of God to work in us. And where? Through us. It's about how we believe and how we think and how that plays out and impacts others, right? How it moves on to others. Making hero makers, helping other people become great too. God's not threatened by your greatness, right? In fact, here's an interesting thing about this. If we are going to live in less greatness than God has designed for us, we're actually becoming kind of a bad representation of God to people. Doesn't that hurt? When I read that, this came actually from the author of the book that we're reading. if we're not going to level up and grow and grow in this greatness of what God has for us to become, we're not giving a good picture of God to other people. Isn't that sad? I don't want to do that. It kind of takes all the room out for those of us who want to be like, it'll all be okay, and I'll just keep doing whatever I'm doing, and God will work it out. Yeah, He'll work it out when we start following. See how that happens. When we start living in greatness by serving others, then that starts working out, and He starts working out of us too and blessing others. And this is about anybody and everybody. In my own mind, I'm thinking about like, how do we put this down? Are we going to have to start thinking, okay, now individually, we might be thinking, oh, now I have to go start a ministry doing this and helping others, or doing that. It's that, but more so, it's how we live in the everyday, right? It's how we minister to our spouses in the everyday, or our children, or our neighbors, how we serve the people closest to us, or if we think that they're actually there to serve us. Let that just rub on you for a while. It's how we help those in our neighbors when we see something going on that they need help, or just even to ask. Or people in your church family. We talked about loving one another, and the love here is one of the ways that the rest of the world sees that you're following Jesus, is because you are actively loving those in God's family, right? So it's putting all that together. He's not threatened by our greatness. In fact, He's wanting to give us more greatness, because just like Paul said, I think I'm going to mess this one up. I think it's in the Corinthians. He said that just of it, we want to keep doing these things to help others so they too will be thankful to God. We want to increase God's people being thankful to God by ministering to others, right? We want to increase that. That's what's going on. The more we serve and help and others receive that, the more other people are thankful to God for that. Pretty cool. Going back to LeBron James a little bit. It might be a basketball guy, okay, in case you're not following that. I don't watch a whole lot of basketball. It's just a bunch of guys running back and forth and slapping each other, and it's kind of cool. I mean, if you're going to watch something, at least watch something that get to tackle each other, throw each other in the dirt, get turf in their helmets, and come out limping. I don't know. I don't watch a whole lot of football either. Maybe that's whatever. Anyway, LeBron James. We look at him or Michael Jordan and we say, look at his stats. Look at his team stats and how they came up. You realize that even LeBron James, this guy, he came out of high school. He never played college. He came out of high school, went straight into the NBA. So there's got to be something going on there, right? There's some talent in that. In a 48-minute game, his average of holding the ball, guess what it is? How many minutes? 6 minutes. 6 minutes. There's no way one person can win a game in 6 minutes. I think he played on average 38 minutes out of 48, depending on what game it was. 6 minutes. That's still higher than most players have the ball because they're passing all the time and doing all kinds of stuff, right? But does that bring some perspective? In 6 minutes, in only 6 minutes, you can't win a game. He increased by his leadership as well as his style of team playing, increased the whole team's stats. It wasn't just his. It was other guys. He would pass to other guys to shoot the ball. He would block for other guys. He would do all kinds of things for the other teammates. And the same way with any of the greatest players that you see, they're team players. Like you can't win by yourself. And not only raised the bar of expectation for them to be winners, but also raised the standards of how we play and what we expect. Like, I'm going to expect to win. I mean, he's on my team. Like, if we were here playing in here, and it was just all of us, and LeBron James came in, and if I was a captain, which I probably wouldn't be, I'd be like, I want him on my team. Sorry, I would pick him first, right? I don't want you to feel bad about that, but stats are outrageous. I want him on my team. So there's a measure of greatness there, but he didn't win on his own. 6 minutes, can't win on your own. Now, Jesus, being the Son of God, has been interacting in humanity since the beginning. I got that. But for all of our time and history, He only came down for 33 years and walked this planet. And we really only have major history, like everyday history, for the last 3 or 4. There's a long time in there we have no idea what was going on. There's lots of interesting folklore, but we really, at 13, we hear his voice when he's in the temple, and then we don't hear anything again for a long time, and then all of a sudden he's, right, 3 years. So let's give him 5 years of teaching and the whole game going on, right? 5 years out of 33. And in those years, look what he did. In those years, we come up, and he was confident enough in his service to those 12, becoming 120 and others. He was confident enough that he's like, all right, fellas, I'm out. You're still in. And they changed the world. We know about Jesus because of that. All right, so service is how that gets done. Let's talk about it. This is the main passage we're going to be talking through. We're almost done, I promise. This, it sounds like I'm starting a whole new thing, but I'm not. This is the intro to the topics that we're going to think through and talk through in the next 6 weeks. And it comes from Philippians 2, all right? Let's check out what these 5 aspects of service, real service. This passage that we're reading is interesting in that it became, when Paul's books were written to a certain people, it's not just those people that would read them. They would pass them around. They went everywhere. So people saw that. And people began to call this passage the Christ hymn because they would repeat it over and over. It became part of just whenever they would meet together, right? They would say, hey, let's talk through the Christ hymn. And they would just repeat this passage that we're going to read. So, and it's the picture of the GSOAT, the greatest servant of all time. So it becomes our example, right, to grow by. So Philippians 2:5, we're going to start with that. Paul says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset. And some translations say attitude. Have the same mindset or attitude as Christ. Wow. Now we might like identify with certain times that we see Jesus do things. Like if we tend to be a little more angry people, we might identify with his attitude when he went to the temple and turned over all the tables. Or when he called Jesus Satan. I mean, when Jesus called Peter Satan. Get thee behind me, Satan. We might think, I identify right there. But we're identifying with all of Jesus. And this part about servanthood is part of that. So attitude is a big deal. And sadly, people misunderstand God's attitude toward them. We're going to look at the mindset of Jesus and how that shapes us and how he has served us already. We're going to think about the inside before we think about how we serve on the outside. Verses 6 through the beginning of 7 say, who being in the very nature God did not consider equality God something to be used to his own advantage. Some of your versions say grasped. Rather, he made himself nothing. So he's in heaven with God, and he's been with God, and he's helped create the world with God. At his words, things were created. And so he was there during all that stuff. Jesus just didn't pop into the picture when he came and was born of Mary. Jesus had been part of the picture from the beginning. And so he's up in all of that, and all the splendor, and all the glory of God in heavenly places. And now he's available to all of us to touch, to hear, to see. Not to all of us, I guess we weren't back then, but for humanity to be able to do that. And so he becomes available. And it's just incredible to think that Jesus would come down to this chaotic, crazy world and give of himself. Not come in like a superhero and get rid of all the bad things, but give of himself so that people could see who he really is. He's available for each and every one of us, even today. That's an even better fact. The rest of verse 7, by taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself. He did something to make it work. As a servant, he did something. He didn't just think something, he did something. He took action, even to his own very death, for our sakes, for all of the world. He took action. It takes courage. Sometimes our action might be one little step just to move us forward. There's going to be lots of little steps in this devotional book in the time of the 40 days. Little steps of serving someone else. Not big, hard things, but little things that we can do to get into the habit. To first have the mindset and then make ourselves available and then to start taking action. Verse 8, and by becoming obedient even to death, even death on a cross. What does that make him able to do? That makes him and him alone able to forgive sin. Nobody else can do that. He can. Because of his death and resurrection, he is able to bring forgiveness to us, to you, to me. He is uniquely gifted and wired to do that. And we are uniquely gifted and wired to serve in the way he wants us to serve. We need to take our place in that and do that. Verses 9 through 11. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. There's some ambition in there. We're called to live with ambition and purpose, aren't we? Let's turn it the other way around. Maybe it's more comfortable. We're called to live with purpose and therefore ambition to move the ball forward, right? We all have whatever it is that God has given us. We all have this, whatever the desire for achievement and moving forward that's in us goes with that and moves that forward. And he is with us in the whole process. He's designed us for those things. And so we move forward and we do those things. We're all called to that. Why? So we can make our own name great? If you think back through the Old Testament, there's some interesting lines that come out, little verbiages. Like when they built the Tower of Babel, why did they do that? There's a term, depending on what version you read, it says that we can make our name great. That really means that we can be eternal. We want our names to be so great that everyone speaks of us from now into eternity. And you know what? We actually are speaking of them. But not in a good way. Not in the way they were looking for. Yeah, not in greatness, but like foul, throw the yellow flag in, right? Bad. You can't do that. Because it's not about our name being great. It's about his name being great. And in the process, he raises us up with him. We get to share in all of that stuff, but it's not about us achieving for us what we want. So those are the 5 aspects of serving like Jesus: attitude, availability, action, ability, and ambition. We can show through others through serving in the midst of the challenges and the cost of that it's worth it doing that, because we're helping to raise others up. The power of the Holy Spirit working in us and through us, because we're not just thinking about us. We're in the kingdom mindset of thinking of others too. So think of how ironic this is. So many people that I would say have a negative experience, definition of what church people are. I rarely hear them say, people that wouldn't go to church and have negative thoughts about church people, I never hear them say, oh, they're so helpful in giving. Usually it's all they want is to take, and they want my money and they want my time. That's kind of, and that's hypocritical, which is why most unchurched people think we're hypocrites. Imagine living as the greatest servant of all time would allow us to live, to be servants, to love, to help. I think I mentioned a couple times, I don't know if you heard this, years ago, this lady who I worked with years ago, and we actually did some Bible studies with them, not particularly Christian, I say that, not at all, I don't think. And anyway, several years ago, I forget that there was some conversation that she was in on Facebook that was like, her response was, you'd never see a bunch of Christians doing that. And I think it was like there was a community help kind of thing going on, and people were helping do something, providing either food or something. Anyway, she's like, you wouldn't see Christians line up to help at something like that. And I was like, I'm like getting in on those things on Facebook. Like, that's just opening yourself up. But I was like, So we had just been to a thing called the Bread Shed that happens in southern Missouri, in which they have a huge thing, multi-church process that they give away so much food. It's just incredible. So our church, we would go over there sometimes and just go help do all that. And I had taken a picture probably 2 days before of all the people on this side of the table were the church people who got together to help. and all the people on this side of the table were there receiving that help. And so I personally messaged her, and I didn't put that out for everyone to see. I messaged that to her, and I said, so all the people on the right are the church people, just so you know. And she said, I knew you'd come up with something like that. And I was like, it's not like we interact very much. In fact, I didn't even talk to her for years. But we see the impact, right? I mean, there could be no denying. We could deny about God's work in other people if all they want to do is shout us down and judge us and be like, whoa, where's the grace of God and all that, right? You can't deny the grace of God at work when we come as servants and bring truth, but bring truth in love and help and blessing. And even, like I said, in our own families, in our own, especially, let's just start there. In our own families, if we're serving each other as Christ would serve, if we're blessing each other as Christ would bless, and then even in our neighbors, or extended family, if we would do that,